People who have suffered prolonged narcissistic abuse and then are trying to move on from that toxic person often find themselves thinking, this is the most difficult thing I've had to endure in my life. Moving on from the person, breaking the toxic bond, the dependency. People often say it's up there at the same level as, serious illnesses or even death of loved ones. That's how heavy that kind of situation is when they're trying to move on and heal from it. But I would even kind of challenge that and say, moving on from the narcissist is, yes, it might be one of the most difficult things you've endured until today, kind of accepting their absence, the role they used to play in your life, but keeping them out of your life and having the right boundaries in place going forwards, and trying to find who this new version of you is that's healthier than the old version of you. That's also very challenging. So it's a whole process. And the first step of the process is like moving on from the narcissist. The second is if them or other similar people try to work their way into your lives, do you have the right boundaries to keep them out? And thirdly, who are you? Because when you start to move on, when you start to heal, there are people who will try to keep you back. And if you're trying to predominantly heal from a long relationship with a toxic person, your significant other, then they do not like the idea of you healing. They do not like the idea that one day you might be in a better place than them. They do not like the idea that one day they might want to have access to you and they might no longer have the access. And a lot of people try so hard to work through this toxicity, which is this negative trauma bond, this just chemical dependency where everything's out of whack, that you just try to have a forward-thinking mind. You try to sometimes you try to be inviting of people into your life because it can be, nobody wants to shut themselves off from society just because they're trying to heal. Because a healing journey can take months, even years. You want to keep interacting with people. But how do you do that and have the right boundaries in place? So a lot of times people, when they're trying to heal from a narcissistic abuse, they find that they don't have the right boundaries in place. And they might feel like they're missing the narcissist. And so they invite somebody into their life who has a similar way about themselves, or who's similarly manipulative or controlling, or just using the person for personal gain. Narcissists, they sponge. Maybe they want a place to live. Maybe they want you to buy them things. Maybe they just want you to supply them in other ways. And sometimes you might think, oh, you're healing, you're moving on, but you find yourself in a vulnerable moment. And it's almost like narcissists can tell when you're in a vulnerable moment. It's not always the case that they appear when you're at your most vulnerable, but a lot of people do claim that they feel that the narcissist can sense when they are in a vulnerable place. And sometimes the Hoover comes at a time where the person can't help but entertain it. So that's just this whole thing about boundaries, because it's hard to establish healthy boundaries if you didn't have them before. And if you're trying to heal from the narcissist, the abuse, you're trying to come together in this new version of you. Sometimes those new boundaries, and they don't really come into place immediately. They take time as well. And in the meantime, you might find yourself at a risk of relapsing because you've allowed them the space to come back in. So there's a lot happening when you're trying to heal. It's you trying to get over the person. And every step of your healing journey, you're in danger of being brought back down if you don't understand the importance of keeping them out of your life, of staying no contact, of not entertaining the Hoover. Because, like I said, narcissists don't like the idea of you moving on. Narcissists don't like the idea of people not needing them, because then it makes them feel impotent. It makes them feel, well, their ego suffers a bruise when they realize they don't have that person under their thumb anymore. And this whole thing around, how do you carry yourself going forwards? How can you be like a social, happy person without falling into the same trap. And again, that in itself is a journey. It doesn't take place from one day to the next. And you might even have a little bit of trial and error as you get there. But the key is, for those first many months, however long, if you're with the person for many years, you might need a lot of months, maybe even years to recover. If you're with the person a little bit less than that, then maybe you can recover more quickly. But it's really important that you keep the narcissist out of your life as you're healing, because they have funny ways of knowing when you're healing, and sometimes they can surface either directly or indirectly through their flying monkeys, mutual acquaintances, at the most strange of times. And all of a sudden you feel you have a setback. Sometimes you don't realize until you look back and say, oh, I can see what happened. Sometimes it's only in hindsight that you actually realize what's happened. But it's not just that. When you bounce out of an abusive relationship and you are starting to piece yourself back together in a better way, it's other people in your life. Sometimes you find that you've had other people in your life who are toxic that maybe you've tolerated. Because if you're the personality type that actually got together with a narcissist, then you're probably the personality type that's excused toxic behaviors from other people. And if you tolerate toxic behaviors from other people, they'll gravitate towards you. The point I'm making is, if you've ever been in a relationship with a narcissist, then chances are you have a lot of other toxic people in your lives, a lot of times in your family, a lot of times in other kind of circles. And those people, when you do start to heal, when you do start to move on, they almost feel a little bit threatened too. I'm not saying that everybody in your life is toxic, is miserable, but there's a little bit of that. You have to be careful, because you'd be surprised at how many times you have people who you think have your best interests at heart. But when you really start to do well, when you really start to improve, how sometimes it can bother them. Because a lot of times you moving on and improving who you are and improving your life circumstances means you have to be a bit selfish. And if you've been the type to be predominantly giving for everyone else in your life, for them, that doesn't sit very well. Because it's almost like, okay, people look at you and they see you no longer place them first. Now you place your own interests first. You now see yourself as number one, and you see everyone else as number two. And not everybody likes that. Thanks for watching.